today I'm going to be talking in general about evolutionary psychology, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that I did for my master's thesis, which was with short and long-term mating strategies, and looking at these different mating strategies and how they may be related to sexual selection of niches related to personality, and more specifically to the extroversion-introversion continuum. All right, here's an outline of what I hope to cover. I'm usually overly ambitious, so we'll see. I want to talk a little bit about evolution just in general first, very broad, and then talk about how it relates to behavior, talk about mating strategies, individual differences in personality, and how these things all might tie together. And then I'll talk a little bit about the project that I did looking at extroversion and mating strategies and variation in extroversion. All right, so just to start off, I'm going to use this definition of evolution. Evolution is a change in gene frequency over time. So we're talking about changes in the genes that exist in a population, and we're typically talking about long periods of time that are really hard for us as humans even to wrap our mind around, because if we only live 70, 80, maximum 100 years, trying to think about millions and billions of years, wrapping our mind around that's sometimes difficult, but that's what we're talking about. So long periods of time, and we're typically talking about gradual changes, so small changes that add up over that period of time. And natural selection also is the mechanism through which evolution works. So basically, you might think of natural selection as survival of the fittest. You've all probably heard this. And basically, this is the mechanism which the genes that help individuals survive are the genes that continue to be passed on, and those are the genes we see around nowadays. So that's natural selection, is that the individual differences, if they give an individual an edge on surviving and reproduction, then they're likely to pass on those genes. And of course, we are celebrating, exploring Darwin, but I don't want to leave out Alfred Wallace, who also thought of the theory of evolution kind of at the same time as Darwin. Well, Darwin, he had written some papers but never published them, and then as Wallace was about to publish papers, he went, wait a minute, that was my idea. So I don't like to leave him out. All right, so here's natural selection in a nutshell. So here we have these insects are all one species, but there's variation among the species, just like us. If you look around the room, there's variation. Every species, every animal has variation among them. And here the predators say, yum, green beetles are favorite. So what do you think is going to happen over time? Do you think we'll see a shift in gene frequency? If the color is genetic, the color variation between these insects that are the same species, and their predator happens to like the green ones for whatever reason, if we look at these insects a generation later, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to end up with more of the brown-orange color surviving, because whatever was in their genes was naturally selected. It was most fit for that particular environment. Now, if you get a different predator that likes a different color, you may see a shift and it changes. So basically, the genes that happen to be most frequent depend on predators that depends on their environment. And that's natural selection in a nutshell. And natural selection may, over time, remember long periods of time, you add up little tiny changes, may result in, I don't know if you can see it right here, but you see this insect? You see it amongst the leaves, right? See, here's a leg right here, and it looks like a leaf. So this is kind of an extreme variation where the insects that look the most like their environment had an advantage, what we call the adaptive trait, and got selected for it. Now, do you think that if there happened to be a drought and all these green leaves are wiped out, that insect would now have that adaptive advantage over others? Probably not, because it would stand out in its environment. So what is adaptive and selected for is highly dependent on the environment that the organism is in, along with other factors like predators. So and you might be thinking, with the insects, you might be thinking that Sure, that if there's variation, you might see shifts in life forms and gene frequency over time, but what if different characteristics don't exist? So if there aren't any insects with new characteristics, then you wouldn't see things evolve into new life forms. You would just see changes in the frequency of things that already exist. And so that's where mutations come in. Mutations are just mistakes in copying the DNA. So every time your body, well, for females in the room, it happened a long time ago in utero, but when your eggs were produced or when male sperm is produced, these A's, T's, C's, and G's, so the DNA gets copied and put into that cell. And every time this happens, there's so many of those in the string that mistakes happen. And so when a mistake happens, you have a new code, which creates some new trait. And so, for example, I have a couple of Darwin's finches up here, and you can see that these birds are really similar, except for slightly different beak shapes. And so this is where Darwin started to think, maybe these birds were all related at once, but something happened. And of course, he didn't know about genetics or code, but we now know that yes, mutations, mistakes happen. And yes, if the code changes, which it does, then you end up with some new characteristic, maybe a beak that's slightly different in its shape. Now, sometimes that difference doesn't really do much. Sometimes it harms the animal, makes it so that they can't get their food. But if it happens by chance to help the animal in that particular environment, then we call it advantageous or adaptive. And then that trait, if it helps the finch get, maybe it gives them a longer beak if they're in a muddy environment and they are able to get insects or worms out of the mud, then it's likely that they'll have a better chance of surviving, and then they'll pass that gene on. Once the mistake happens, it's there to stay, and any offspring they have, should they be lucky enough to survive, it will get passed on to the future generations. So thinking about mutations, new characteristics in Darwin's finches, could this possibly be the future of his finches? Okay, so one person thinks it's funny. All right, maybe, maybe not. Now, keep in mind that in order for evolution to occur, in order for genes to shift in frequency, for them to become more popular, they have to go through natural selection. So it has to help the animal, those mutations have to help them in some way survive, right? So I don't know if this would help these animals survive or not, but survival isn't enough to pass on genetic material. You have to survive, but you can survive and not reproduce, and you're not going to pass on those genes, and they're not going to become more frequent in the current environment. So coming from an evolutionary psychology perspective, we not only think about survival of the fittest, but we also think about reproduction. So yes, you have to survive, and then the second step is you have to reproduce, which may include attracting a mate, putting on a display to attract a mate, convincing someone that you're worth mating with. And so these are things that we just want to think about, is reproduction, which gets into sexual selection. And I just want to kind of tie how genetics and behavior goes together and evolution. So DNA is basically the code to build everything in your body. So it's just a code. It says, grab these proteins, put them together in this order, build the structures in your heart, in your skeleton, everywhere in your body. And this organ right here, the brain, happens to be built of those proteins that the DNA says put it together in this particular way. And if you think about the brain, it's most intricately involved in behavior. So it doesn't necessarily control us, where you got this thing going, move, this way like a robot, but the way that your brain is set up allows us to have certain emotions, to feel certain things, to remember things, to forget other things, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on what you're thinking about. So from an evolutionary perspective, genes, these things, that contribute to brains, this thing, that are most fit for a particular environment, so remember you have to take in the environmental considerations, will survive or become more common. So if you have a brain that sets you up to act in a certain way that helps you survive or reproduce, get a mate, then you expect those genes to get passed on and become the more common genes that we see now in populations. So I figured it's almost Turkey Day, right? And so I thought it would be a good time to talk about some turkey mating behavior. And anyone know how turkeys mate? Yeah? So the male, they have to attract a mate. They have to fluff up their feathers and make the female think, ooh, I like that turkey. They look good. And then they put out their tail and they shake it and they waddle around and do a little dance to seduce her, and then they mount and they copulate. So here are some turkeys in that process. Now, some researchers wanted to see, they said, well, how smart are turkeys? They said, what if we show them a wood turkey? So, let's see. So they brought in, and it probably looked a little more female-like, but they brought in a wooden turkey, and they showed it to these male turkeys. And guess what they did? They fluffed up their feathers, they waggled their tail, they did the dance, they mounted and copulated. And the researchers, that's a little strange. And they said, well, maybe it looked a lot like a turkey. Let's try to minimize, let's get rid of the feathers. And so they kept going with this wooden turkey. They would take away things like take away the feathers, take away the body. They got all the way down to just a stick with a knob on the end, no eyes, no feathers. And you know what the turkey would do? Put its tail feathers out, do the dance, mount and copulate. So the researchers came to the conclusion that there must have been some advantage to having this turkey brain, that natural selection let them act like this, because obviously it's not going to help them pass on their genes to copulate with the wood. But if you think about in their natural environment, okay, when researchers aren't messing with them, if they saw something that slightly resembled a female turkey, maybe it was a bush, okay, and the turkey looks at that bush, and there's two male turkeys here, so you see the two male turkeys, and they're both looking at the bush, and they're like, is this a female or is it a bush? And one of them goes, I don't care, I'm going for it. Okay. And the other male turkey's like, no, I'm holding back. Okay. Now, what did that eager male turkey, what did it lose? A little bit of sperm, right? Not a big deal. Not a huge cost to the turkey. Okay. Now, let's say a scraggly female comes along, and so the same two male turkeys are looking, and they're like, is it a female or is it a bush? And the hesitant turkey's still thinking about it. What's the eager turkey doing? Passing on DNA, right? What type of DNA are we going to see in those baby turkeys? So we're going to eventually end up seeing all these turkeys that are eager, okay? Because those were the ones that were successful in passing on their DNA. So that's just an example of how genes that are most fit in that particular environment, that give that turkey a brain that says, act in a way that will pass on your genes, gets passed on and becomes the most common genes. Now, what do you think happened to the poor turkey that was hesitant and really wanted to make sure it was a female and not a bush? Didn't pass on the genes? It's an old story. We don't see those genes anymore. So we see a shift in gene frequency towards the behavior that at that point in time helped them pass on their genes. So this example of the research was taken from this book, The Moral Animal. I highly recommend this book if you like this type of information. It's a fun book that goes through Darwin's life and also pulls in research from all kinds of evolutionary and anthropology and different examples and summarizes them in a really reader-friendly way. So that example of the turkey was from Robert Wright's Moral Animal. So if you're interested in this, I don't get any commission off this, but I highly recommend this book. So let's look at human behavior. So here's a quote from Cosmides and Tooby, and they're a psychology, anthropology team at UCSB in Santa Barbara, where I did research over one summer with them. And so this is a quote from them. It says, the brain, and they're talking mostly about humans. So the human brain is viewed as an information processing machine that was designed by natural selection to face adaptive problems of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So basically, the perspective of evolutionary psychology is that just like that eager turkey, humans who made it through natural selection our ancestors who had brains that helped them pass on their genes are the genes that now exist in our current population. And so the thinking is, what was it about our ancestors in their particular environment that passed the genes on and made us who we are today? So it's looking at our current behavior from the lens of it must have helped them survive somehow. Now you might be thinking we're smarter than turkeys, right? A little bit. If you read the Moral Animal, Robert Wright, he makes the point that humans sometimes will look at pornography. So a magazine. So if you think about a magazine, what is a magazine made out of? Paper, ground up wood, kind of like, is it going to help to copulate with a ground up piece of paper plastered, into a thin thing with ink spread all over it? No. But kind of like those turkeys, humans have brains that probably back in our hunter-gatherer ancestor stage, if you saw something that looked like a naked human, it was probably a naked human, not ground up piece of wood with ink splattered all over it. All right, so here's another example from Robert Wright's Moral Animal. He said, suppose we had a gene for love. And this is hypothetical. We know we do have some genes for things like neurotransmitters and hormones that may help us experience the emotion of love. But he said, suppose we had this XL love gene. And everyone of our ancestors had this love gene. And then someone had a mutation. And that mutation made them grow an XXL love gene. So maybe they're producing more oxytocin. And it makes them feel more love for their offspring. So can you think of how feeling more love with this XXL love gene might help an individual, let's say a mother bond with her infant. She feels stronger love than anyone else can even feel because they don't have the same chemistry in their brain to allow them to feel that strong connection and love. So what might be the results, thinking from an evolutionary perspective? Maybe she, when she's out with her offspring and she's faced with a predator, instead of dropping the baby and running, she keeps the baby with her and protects them. Maybe when they're older, she's willing to share food with her offspring. And so her offspring probably has a better chance of surviving because she invests more and maybe sacrifices herself more for the offspring compared to others who just have the XL love gene. So this is another example from the Moral Animal, providing protection, better cared for, and if that gives that offspring an edge on survival, guess what? If you survive, you might be lucky enough to reproduce, and what are they going to do? They're going to pass on this XXL love gene, and if you go generation after generation after generation later, you may see that everyone ends up with that XXL love gene. All right. So when we talk about these types of behaviors, we always want to consider proximate and ultimate explanations or mechanisms through which these things work. Now, if you ask a mother, why do you wake up at night and feed your newborn? She's probably not going to say, I'm just really hoping they survive long enough to mature sexually and pass on my genes. That's not even in their mind, maybe, but probably not. They're probably just going to go, well, I don't know. I can't stand it when they cry. It makes me cringe. I have this feeling. There's some chemistry in their brain that makes them react. And so those immediate feelings we call proximate explanations. So you may have hormones that make you act a certain way. You might have hormones that make you attracted to someone. You can't think about them. In fact, you're not even processing what I'm saying right now because you're just thinking about that person. And those are approximate explanations. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we say that all of those hormones, the brain wiring, those proximate things that make your body and make your brain think certain things have some sort of ultimate explanation. And the ultimate explanation is always that whatever that proximate thing is doing, that attraction, making you think about that other person, the ultimate explanation is that it's going to increase your chances of passing on your genes reproducing. Or that it did help in our old environment, in our ancestors' environment. And so another term that we use in evolutionary psychology is the EEA, or the Environment of Evolutionary Adaptedness. And we use this term because, like I said, you may act in a certain way that helped your ancestors reproduce, but it may not necessarily help individuals now reproduce. So like with the pornography, that's not going to help anyone pass on their genes. But in the old environment that our ancestors were in, if they had a visual image come in with a naked person, it was probably a naked person, and acting on that would have helped them pass on their genes, where nowadays it may not have the same effects. And our environment and technology is changing so quickly that our brains haven't had time to evolve and to catch up to this type of environment that we're in. And so a lot of evolutionary psychologists think that the brains we have now are really brains that were best selected for this type of environment that our hunter-gatherer ancestors were in. Brains that lived in environments where the groups were highly related, where there were smaller groups, where you had a lot of space. You weren't crammed, in cars where you couldn't move and people all around you. And they think that maybe this mismatch is why there's road rage or there's high levels of mental illness, is because our brains are wired for a different type of environment, and we have to kind of adapt to the environment we're in. All right. So another concept I want to introduce to you is the concept of parental investment and how this relates to mating strategies. So parental investment theory suggests that the amount of investment required to reproduce, the minimal amount of investment required to reproduce, so keep in mind minimal, should affect the type of mating strategy that a species tends to adopt. And so here, and we'll come back to this, the type of mating strategy, quantity versus quality. So first of all, let's just talk about parental investment and humans. So for females, what is the minimum required to reproduce? So what energy or costs? What do you have to do in order to reproduce? Think about this. You have to produce an egg, right? So well, first of all, you have to survive. You have to produce an egg. And so is that enough to reproduce? No. So you have to produce an egg. You have to ovulate. So what was that? Fertilize. So you have to fertilize the egg. Now, if you're going to produce an egg and ovulate and get it fertilized, if you have to have enough food for your body to not be stressed, because if you're extremely malnourished, your hormones are not going to be in line, and you're not going to be able to ovulate. You're not going to be able to get that egg fertilized. So you have to have enough food. That's why extreme athletes sometimes won't ovulate. Is their body is too stressed. The hormones aren't there and able to ovulate. And so you have to ovulate. You have to mate. Is that enough? What else? So where are we? Make an egg. Ovulate. How about gestation, pregnancy? For humans, around 9 months gestation. And I used to think, oh, not a big deal. You know, 9 months of your life, until my last son, who's now almost 6. And I was so sick during the beginning that I lost 10 pounds like within a month, because I couldn't hold food down, I couldn't hold water down. So what do? They put you in the hospital, hook you up to an IV. You're like, okay, I'm good, I'm not going to die. But think about our EEA, the environment our ancestors were in. Could they do that? No. So that could have been their life. That could have been a huge cost to them. So you have to, now, and when I was that sick, I had trouble doing anything. And so you would need someone to help, get food for you if you can't gather food. So gestation, 9 months gestation, and then our ancestors, and I probably don't have enough on here because in between here, I don't have you have to go through birth. Birthing is a huge cost with energy plus risk. If a predator, think about our ancestors, if a predator came along while someone was giving birth, do you think they would be in the best state to fight off that predator? So huge cost and risk, and they would definitely need some resources, help from other people during that time. Plus, back then, they couldn't just give birth and walk away, because human infants are born so helpless. They would also have to lactate, and in order to lactate, you need the same additional amount of calories that you do going through pregnancy. So you need additional calories, which means finding food while you're caring for this little helpless being. So a lot of investment goes into reproducing, passing your genes on. Okay. Let's talk about male parental investment. So in order for men to reproduce, they would have to create sperm. So they have to survive. That's given for anyone. Then they have to produce sperm. All right. Then what do they have to do? They have to find a mate. They have to find someone to fertilize. And then what? It's quiet. All right. So let me go back. Sorry, that was a preview. So that's it. Now, you might be thinking, wait, but couldn't they help protect the female while she's giving birth or bring her the extra calories she needs during gestation? And yes, they could do all of those things, but if they walk away after the fertilization, could they still reproduce and pass their genes on? Sure. If those eager turkeys reproduced and walked away and never looked back, something might come out of it, right? Maybe, maybe not, but it's possible. And parental investment theory looks at what's the minimal required. Okay, so the minimal required, so we look at the minimal required for males and the minimal required for females, and do we agree that there's a little bit of a difference in minimum required? Okay. So parental investment theory suggests that the more risk and the more energy involved, the more investment that's required, the pickier you should be about who you mate with. Because if the female goes through this, risks her life, lots of energy, a year, 2, 3 of her time, and she mated with someone with bad genes, guess what? That was a huge loss, right? If the male makes the wrong choice and mate, what did he lose? Little sperm. He can make more, not a big deal, right? Devastating here, not so devastating here, which is probably why the male turkey is like, lost a little sperm, not a big deal. So parental investment theory suggests that when we're looking at quantity means numbers, like the male turkey. If there's only a little bit required, a little sperm, not much loss, not much investment, they should go for quantity. The turkey should be like, yeah, I'll mate with whatever, whomever, it doesn't matter, because I don't have much to lose. But if you have a lot to lose, should you be that eager to mate with any and everything? No, so it suggests that according to evolution, you should have a brain that focuses on quality, because those who had their genes get passed on were successful and didn't waste everything on bad genes. So it suggests that the females should, at least for humans, should focus more on quality and be a little bit more careful, choosy about who they mate with. Now, this is extremely generalizing, and I know that not all of you out there are like this, but basically this is a summary of parental investment theory, what most males want, quantity, what most females want, quality. And of course, this is generalizing. Not everyone's like this, but this is also based on research. The idea, in 1978, Florida State University, they conducted a study where Confederates, so researchers, went up to students whom they didn't know, strangers, and they had an equally attractive male and female student, researcher, and they would go up to someone of the opposite sex, and so that she would go up and say, "Excuse me, I've noticed you around campus. I find you attractive. Would you like to go to bed with me tonight?" And basically, they would wait till the person said yes or no. They'd track that data, and then they'd say, "I'm sorry, this was actually part of a social research study. I actually don't want to go home with you, but thank you for participating." And they would go on with their day. Now, what do you think? Do you think there was a difference in males and females? How many males do you think said yes? So 75% of men said yes. Okay. Remember I said not all men are like this. 75%. Okay. What percent of women do you think said yes? 0%. Okay. So evidence to support parental investment theory. Now you might say 1978, that was kind of a while ago. Maybe we've changed in our acceptance of females being sexual. And so this has actually been replicated, which I don't have the data up here, but you can look it up. It's been replicated, it was replicated in the 90s. Do you think we found equal answers from males and females? They had 5% of females say yes. So we saw a little bit of an increase, but still a discrepancy between males and females. And just think about if you were in this study, can you imagine the responses of men in this study? They're probably like, "Oh yes," and then Can you imagine the responses of women in this study with a man coming up to them and saying, come to bed with me? I'm imagining he had to like dodge a few purses trying to hit him. Maybe. All right, so this supports parental investment theory, that the sex that requires a lot more investment might be choosier. They're not gonna go home necessarily, most of them on the first try. They're gonna, wait, I don't know anything about you. Are you gonna help, do you have enough money to support our offspring? And they're gonna wanna know a little bit more. So that explains it. No one thinks it's funny, okay. Is it hard to see? This is just a joke, it's funny, but it has maternal urges and weddings in the female brain, shopping lobe, gossip lobe, and then over here we've got, I don't know, beer lobe, sex, like the turkey. I think it's kind of funny. All right, so parental investment theory suggests that mating systems within a species are dependent on whether parental investment, minimum investment, has a difference between males and females or whether that is equal. And so when we look at these different mating systems, so some animals exhibit polygyny, which is where the male mates with lots of females or several, and the females are pickier. They're only gonna mate with that one male or only a few males. So like gorillas, there's one big silverback that mates with the females, with a harem, with a group, but they're only gonna mate with him. They're not gonna go around mating with lots of males. Okay? So he gets lots of females, quantity, and the females are gonna go for just one quantity, which is what we call polygyny. Polyandry is the opposite. Polyandry is where the female chooses lots of mates, but the male is highly picky and is only going to mate with one mate or only a couple. Now, if you think about parental investment theory, why would the male go for quantity? Because there's not much to lose, right? And the female should go for quality, and so be more selective and have fewer mates. So you would think that polyandry would only happen when the roles are reversed. Right? So you would have to have a situation where the male had a lot of investment. Otherwise, why would he be picky and say, nope, I'm only going to pick one or two mates? And that's exactly where we see polyandry in some species, like some seahorses. This is actually the male seahorse. So the female, the female's fertilized. She has the larger egg that's fertilized, but then she takes all those fertilized embryos and implants them into the male's pouch, and she says, see you later. And then guess what? The male has all of this investment. And so who do you think's pickier in that case? The males are pickier. The males are the ones that say, oh, I'm only gonna pick a few, where the female's like, my work's done, I'm off to mate with someone else and pass on more genes. And there are other cases like monogamy. There are some birds, like penguins, where you have the egg outside developing and you can have more equal parental investment. All right, so this is a cover of Current Biology, an old cover, it's not current, but these are bluegill sunfish, and they're actually the same species. And this is a male right here, the large orange bluegill. And then this one is a female, blue in color. Now, what do you think about this one? Male or female? So it looks like a female, but it tricks someone. It's actually a male. So they actually have two types of male bluegills. They have what we call parentals, which look like this, they're big, and then they have drifters. And the drifters resemble the females, and basically they trick the males. They go around and they're like, and they sneak up to eggs, to the nest, the fish eggs, and they fertilize a few, and then they dart off and never look back. And so, has anyone seen Finding Nemo? What happens if you just leave the eggs alone, don't protect them? Decreases the chance of passing on genes. But guess what? These drifters don't really have to worry about it because these parental fish, they're the good parents. They're the male figure that sticks around and they say, I'll stay with this one female and I'll protect the eggs from predators. And so there's this balance between drifters and parentals. Now, what do you think happens if the drifters are too successful? If they go around and fertilize all the eggs, what happens? All the young fish are going to be blue drifters. And guess what? No one's protecting the eggs, and what happens to the population? It starts to drop. So there's a certain frequency that has to be maintained in this environment where their strategy, quantity, is only successful in a particular environment. Now, wouldn't it be better if these fish could look at the environment and it could go, there doesn't look like there's enough parentals. I don't think being a drifter is a good strategy. I think I'll stick around and be a parental and take care of these eggs and protect them. And so as humans, are we a little bit more flexible in our mating strategies? Can we assess the situation and go, maybe I want to do this in this case, but not in this case? So we're not as hardwired maybe as these fish. And that's where strategic pluralism trade-off theory comes into play. And this is the theory that perhaps we don't always have the same mating strategy. Maybe if our environment, we know that the world is ending or food is scarce, we're going to mate as quickly as possible. Or maybe there aren't very many quality mates. Then you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to be so picky. I'm going to mate with anyone. So strategic pluralism theory suggests that maybe humans choose different strategies depending on the environment, the availability, and so forth. And so this suggests that short-term and long-term mating strategies, quantity versus quality, may be employed in different scenarios. All right, so there may be cases where, let's talk about men for a minute. There may be cases where short-term mating is the best strategy, like the turkey. We talked about that. You would think, well, why don't all men have brains that just mate with any and everything out there? And not all men do. We saw only 75% said yes, they'd go home back in 1978 with the attractive stranger. So maybe there's some men that are like, you know what, I'm going to hold off on this short-term mating, and I'm willing to invest long-term if I find the right person. So maybe a man finds a woman that's just gorgeous, has great genes, beautiful, great strong genes, healthy, and he's like, you know what, forget all the other women out there. I'm marrying you. I'm putting a ring on your finger. And I'll give you all of my income. I'll hand over the bank checkbook, all my resources. Now, is he going to do that for just anyone? If some stranger, suppose they had repeated that Florida State University study, and instead of saying, would you like to go to bed with me, she walks up and says, hi, I've noticed you around campus. I find you attractive. Would you like to get married today? No way, right? They go, not a chance. Well, maybe a few, but probably not. And so this long-term strategy. Are men willing to commit? Definitely, in the right circumstances. And so if you think about adding resources, protection, if you go back to our EEA and think about our ancestors, if they were going to give up other mates, if they were going to bring all the food and give it to the female and give them all their time and energy and resources, it better be worth it, right? So then their investment goes up and they better be equally choosy, just like the females. So what about women? Do women always go for the quality long-term strategies, or do some women like to have a one-night stand, a fling? There's research, not only in human species, but in other animals, that even when you expect them to go for quality because that's what they should be, the choosier sex, that it doesn't always happen. Sometimes women and other female birds that you would expect to stay committed will go out and have these short-term relationships, flings. So there are some theories that maybe women or the birds or other animals that do this see someone with better genes than their committed partner, and they might have that fling to get the good genes, but then stick with the partner who's going to give them resources and money and invest and protect the offspring. And so they get the best of both worlds that way. So parental investment, this just takes into consideration that long-term mating isn't always the strategy, or short-term mating, it might be a combination of the two. And we call, when you trick a partner into investing in genes that are not their own, that's what we call cuckoldry. So that would be where she has a fling, gets the good genes, but then has someone else thinking it's their offspring and investing. All right. How are we doing? You're with me? Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about personality. How many of you, so extroversion, introversion, how many of you think of yourself as an introvert? I'll wait, because I know some of those introverts are like, do I want to answer this question? How many of you consider yourself an extrovert? Okay, which one do you think is better? Let's find out. All right, so personality, there is genetics research that suggests, behavioral genetic research that suggests that personality may be partly heritable, meaning that part of you feeling like you're an extrovert or an introvert may be because of the genes you got from your parents that set up your brain to want, seek a lot of activity, involvement, or not. It may be related to the dopamine in our brains. So personality may be selected for. So if something is heritable, that means that if a certain type of behavior helps you reproduce, then we would expect those genes to be passed on and become more common. So mate selection criteria should also favor or attract us to those personalities that will best help us pass on our genes. Now, we do see variation. Some of you were introverts, some of you said you were extroverts. We see variation in personality traits, and this could just be a byproduct of variation, just like those beetles, where there's some variation that hasn't been weeded out or variation that exists. But this also might be because multiple selection pressures or niches, specific environments are better for those of you who are introverts, and other niches are better for you if you're an introvert or extrovert. So this is where what I focused on in my research is that maybe this variation is due to different niches in mating strategies. So just so you can see, heritability of extroversion, and I think of extroversion and introversion as a continuum where you're high in extroversion or you're low in extroversion, meaning you're introverted. Okay? And heritability of this is 0.62, meaning 62% of differences, and it ranges from like 0.3 to 0.62 in the estimates, but that's probably the highest estimate I've seen. Means 62% of the differences of who's extroverted and introverted are due to differences in your genes. So is it completely genetic? There's still a component of this that is environmental, and people can be flexible, but there is a heritable component. And so different niche selections could have different mate preferences for introverts and extroverts, and mating strategy as a selection pressure. So are extroverts more desirable? This was the question I asked. Are extroverts more desirable for short-term mating, so that fling to get the good genes, where introverts are more desirable for long-term mating strategies? And so here are some of the benefits, costs of being extroverted, and we could flip this around and say the opposite of this is true for being introverted. According to researchers, that there tend to be more leaders among the extroverts, and higher ambition rating for those who are higher in extroversion, more recreational athletics for those who are extroverted, higher sensation seeking, risk taking, more injuries due to hospital stays for those who are extroverted. Why do you think we have more extroverts who end up in the hospital? Yeah, they're out there doing those dangerous things. They're out at the parties and doing things that make them more at risk, where if you're introverted, maybe you're more at home reading books, that type of thing. So higher divorce rates for those who are extroverted, and more sexual partners, like the turkeys. So the reverse is true. If you're an introvert, you're less likely to end up in the hospital, you're likely to have fewer sexual partners, lower divorce rates, all of that. So it seems like there might be some costs and benefits to being. Now, I want to point out that this is generalizing. Not all introverts are going to stay home and never go to a party. For example, here we have a rally that they're so bad, even introverts are here. So the introverts might put themselves at risk and end up in the hospital, but it's going to take a little bit more work for them to put themselves out there. So my thesis study, I looked at attraction ratings. So I recruited students from here, Cal State San Marcos, And I asked them to rate how attractive a photo was of an individual. The photos were all the same, but the descriptions of the person in the photo varied. So I had them either be extroverted or introverted. And I didn't want to just look at extroversion because extroversion has lots of little components. So I looked at gregariousness, which is how social, outgoing they are, that part of extroversion, and excitement seeking. So are they going out and skydiving and things like that? Because I wanted to see, is it the risk-taking in the extroversion or the social factor of extroversion? And my outcome measure was I would have them look at this picture of a person, read their description, and then answer some questions about this person. And one of the questions was, how attractive is this individual for a fling or a one-night stand? And they would rate them from not attractive to highly attractive. Yes, I would like to meet this person and have a one-night stand with them. And then the next question was, long-term, how attractive is this individual for long-term relationships such as marriage? And I collected information from 240 heterosexual college students, average age 22.8, mostly Caucasian and Hispanic, mostly single, dating, committed, 10% were married. I thought about throwing out the married individuals, but when I did an analysis and looked at their attraction ratings, they actually rated the people in the pictures as more attractive for a fling, one-night stand, and just overall than the single people. So I don't know, maybe something about, wanting what you can't have. So I decided to keep them in this study. All right, so my procedure, I had a cover story. Yes, I lied to the students who participated. Sometimes we have to do that in social research. I told them that this was a personality study. I didn't want them knowing what I was researching. I wanted them to be blind to the aspects that I was looking at. So I told them that I was doing a study on personality. I took their picture so that they would think that the picture they were looking at was another student who had participated. I had them write a description of their personality. I had them take a personality inventory, and then they had to fill out read this. I said, okay, here's a description from another student who's participated. Please read it and fill out their personality inventory. I said, we're just trying to see if personality inventories really capture personality the way they should. And those two questions about mating, they were embedded in a long list of questions about personality. So it wasn't just glaring at them that we were looking at mating strategies. And so they took the personality, they did this, they rated the target, the individual. We also took some information about we'll talk about that in just a second, so let me move on. So there were four different descriptions of the one picture. There was highly extroverted, high in gregarious, high in excitement seeking, or introverted, low in gregariousness or low in excitement seeking. And just to help you understand the four different conditions, I have some pictures here. So they were either extroverted, high in gregariousness, social, life of the party, or in excitement seeking. So we had those two descriptions, and then we had two introverted descriptions, the low in gregariousness and low in excitement seeking. Now you notice here, this picture, this is me when I drive. It's 35 and I'm going 30, and my husband's going, come on, go a little faster. But that you can see that you might get a confound of following the law versus being introverted and just not wanting to seek excitement. And so I didn't just arbitrarily make up the descriptions. If you Google introverts and extroverts, you'll come up with all kinds of things like introvert date ideas, bookstore, cloud. But this could confound, maybe they just like pets or they like books. And so I didn't just use some Google description to come up with my four different descriptions of the personalities. I used the NEO, which is a personality inventory, and I took actual items from there and put those into my description. So if the NEO said vacationing in crowded areas, then I put that into my description so that it accurately portrayed someone who was extroverted or introverted. Now, I told you that the pictures were all the same. So there was one male picture I used and one female picture that I used. And the pictures came from this website called hotornot.com. And because this was done 10 years ago, none of you probably know what that is. So I thought I would give you a more modern example. It's kind of this thing, like what you do now, where you load a picture up, but instead of swiping right, swiping left, they would mark 10, 9. So if they thought the person was hot, they would give them a rating. If they thought they were not, they would give them a rating. And pretty soon you have like 10,000 people who have rated this photo. And so I knew this photo belonged to someone who was hot or not. And basically what I did was I chose a picture that was right in the middle range because I didn't want it to be so attractive that we got no variation in rating because we hit a ceiling effect, or so ugly that we hit the basement effect. I wanted it in the middle so it could vary a little based on their personality and the description. So here's a target example. This is the picture that I used. And this is one of the conditions. It says, I'm an energetic person. I like excitement. I even study best with some noise. In my spare time, I enjoy riding motorcycles, skydiving, and watching scary movies. I also like going to sports events. I like bright colors and lights. Las Vegas is my favorite place to vacation. So what do you think? Extrovert, introvert? So that was one of our extrovert examples. Of course, I had 3 other conditions with the same picture, but they were randomly assigned. Each participant would be randomly assigned to either read this description or have the exact same picture with an introverted description. So the results of my heterosexual female participants rating this picture in the different categories of extroversion versus introversion. So did you see the results? What do you think? What was better, extroversion, introversion? All right, so in general, how attractive is this mug, basically? Extroverted description, slightly more attractive than the introverted. Exact same picture. Okay. When we asked, how attractive is this person for a one-night stand? This difference grew. So the blue, the high excitement seeking. So this is the guy who likes to ride motorcycles and go skydiving. Guess what? The females, the women in the study rated this person attractive for a one-night stand, fun, right? And the guy who was described as low excitement seeking, not a great one-night stand guy. Okay? When it came to long-term, guess what happened? Flipped. How attractive is this person for marriage? The motorcycle, skydiving guy, what happened? His rating dropped. And what happened to the introvert? Rating went up. So what's better, extroversion, introversion? Does it depend on whether you're looking for short-term or long-term, or just in general? All right, and we found the exact same thing for gregariousness. So it didn't matter if the extroversion was the risk-taking, going to put themselves in danger, or whether it's being social and out there in life with the party type of thing. The exact same results, where the extrovert was better for the short term and and the introvert was better for the long-term ratings. Now, think about this from an evolutionary perspective. If someone was a high risk taker, because they were extroverted, what might they be willing to do? Might they be willing to go hunt, in dangerous conditions? Sure. Might they be willing to, they might bring back resources and food that you might not otherwise get. But if they're willing to go hunt in dangerous conditions, what might happen to them? They might die, they might get killed. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, short term, that's great. I reap the benefits, but long term, if I'm going to need someone to help bring resources to infants and stick around for the long haul, is that the best scenario? Possibly not. Now, we also looked at a female image, and we had heterosexual men rate her image based on the same 4 different descriptions and conditions. We weren't sure what we would find here because we could see where in our EEA, the men going out and taking risks and bringing back food and that type of thing and not sticking around for resources would play a role in this, but we didn't think that extroversion necessarily would help our female ancestors. We did, with the females, find the same pattern that we found with males. So we found, but do you see this right here? Just the general attraction? No, it was more based on the picture than it was whether she was extroverted or introverted. They're like, nope, picture's rating about the same. But when we started talking about a one-night stand, then we got the same results. If she was extroverted, life of the party, they were like, yeah, fun, one-night stand. But they were like, maybe not such a good idea. She's not going to, she might leave me with these kids and not stick around to help raise them. Okay? So the exact same results for both the excitement seeking and the gregariousness in females. Now, we also looked at some of the characteristics of the participants who were rating these individuals. We thought, well, maybe if they're extroverted themselves, or maybe if they're, have certain sexual behaviors. And so we looked at sociosexuality, or SOI, and basically this is a scale that says, how much commitment do you need before you have sex with someone? Okay. So those turkeys, they would be high on this SOI scale. Those male turkeys, they'd be like, I'll mate with anyone, even a piece of wood. Okay. The lower you get on this SOI scale, you're like a little bit more coy. No, I'm not going to mate with you unless I know you for 5 years and we're married. Okay. So we did find short-term attraction, the fling, had the highest rating when the participant was high with SOI. So when the participant was like this, high on the SOI, yes, come on, bring it on, I'll mate with, I don't need much or to know much about you before mating with you, then they rated the fling higher, and when they were placed with an extroverted description. So there may be some interactions happening between the participants' own personalities, what they're like, and who they're paired with, what type of person they're attracted to. So this may support evidence that there are different niches for short-term and long-term preferences. Maybe some personality types are attracted to extroverts more, while other personality types are attracted to introverts, and that there may be different niches depending on whether you're looking for short-term investment or long-term investment, or a combination of the two. And perhaps the continuum of extroversion is just not a fluke. Maybe in our EEA, our ancestors, there was a niche for those extroverts. They were like those fish that darted in, fertilized, and took off, where the introverts were the ones who stuck around and got their genes passed on in a slow and steady way, but they both worked in that particular environment. All right, well, thank you.